Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Yeah. Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. We're delighted to be broadcasting with you today. It's great to have you in class. Mackenzie's engineering the broadcast in Minnesota at GCN. Dr. Richard Allen Miller's with us. Welcome, Rick.
Good morning. Yeah, I know. I like, who's Lindsay? Who's he?
Mackenzie?
Mackenzie, yeah.
Yeah, Mackenzie.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's our engineer today. He engineers for us quite a bit, and he's a delightful young man. And it's wonderful having him side by side with us at the broadcast. Takes care of all the details, and just before we went live, I mean seconds before, I was having frame loss here, digital frame loss, between us and Genesis Communications Network. And so I said to Mackenzie, all right, well, let me reconnect and see if it gets any better. And it got a little bit better, but the connection is a little iffy, and it's been iffy. And Rick, it's been iffy for weeks now. And we have a plan B should I get disconnected. And by the way, if I do, Rick, I'll be reconnected within a minute. So just take over, and I'll be right back if we do get disconnected. I just saw a dropout right there about 4 seconds ago. So if you hear an absence of audio, that's what's going on.
And you're gone, huh?
Well, actually, it'd be nice if there were a beep. There's no beep. It's just gone.
Yeah.
But I just want to share that with you. Rick, do you think that any of these anomalies have to do with the weather extremes here in Missouri? I'll tell you what I did yesterday. Bruce Kay is our electrical engineer instructor. He's one of them, and he and I are building our solar arrays and our solar off-grid systems, and he's doing it slightly different from the way I'm doing it. And we're collaborating. We're talking about what works and what doesn't work, and better ideas, and we're sharing it. And it's all wonderful. And I noticed that we have equipment in the garage. So our inverter is in the garage, and it produces heat. It literally produces heat. So I mentioned to him, I said, Bruce, keep this in mind, because when you power your inverter on, it's going to produce some heat. So I measured the temperature inside the garage yesterday. 99 degrees inside the garage. Now the garage is fully insulated. It has fully foam insulated garage doors, and it was still 99 degrees inside the garage. It was 89 degrees outside the garage, ambient temperature. The roof, I measured the roof, and it was 174 degrees. The roof of the house facing west in the sun, 174. The temperature of the garage door skin on the outside of the garage doors facing the sun was 154 degrees Fahrenheit. These are pretty high temperatures. You don't want to touch the roof at 174 degrees. You don't even want to be inside the garage at 99 degrees. And you don't want to be holding onto the garage door at 154 degrees. The house is made out of stone. It's gray stone, and it's kind of thick. And the stone on the house was 118 degrees in the sun. So the sun had enough time to warm up the siding of the house, which is thick stone and mortar, 118 degrees. That's pretty hot, Rick. And we're not in Phoenix, Arizona, or Southern California.
Yeah, so you could, for example, put pipe up there, painting it black also, and have water running through it for a hot water source that would no longer need a heater to heat your water and have a hot water tank. You could
You're absolutely right.
use that as a heat exchange system to cool your house. That heat can be used with an exchanger to cool things. And so you could also paint. That's a hot one. That's a simple, large pipe for the winter and for the possibilities of summer. And you need an exchange system to cool what is now heating. Just putting a fan to circulate the air and changing the vapor pressure by having it blow across a pool of water, like a pan of water in front, is what we call, what is that? That's a type of, before air conditioners, they call a heat pump.
Yeah, a swamp cooler.
Yeah, a swamp heater, right, or a swamp cooler. And all of those things are the way Grandpa used to do it, because they didn't have Freon, and they didn't have these kinds of compressible gases, anhydrous ammonia, things of that nature that would work in a different system. And of course, if they leak, you've got toxic gases being released. So there's a better way to do that. I basically would suggest you take advantage of that heat, because that heat will ignite certain kinds of products at some point after you have so crispy fried them down so there's no water inside it. It's about water. It is, what I'm discovering is that everything in our physics and sciences is somehow related to water. I was reminded of Grace Thorne and her haunted house. And what is a poltergeist? Exactly. Because once you understand or have a model for trying to understand what a poltergeist is or something of that nature, now you have the ability to defend yourself, because it's like the solution is always within the question. If you ask enough information, in information theory, you have enough information to answer it. In other words, once you're able to form a question of what the problem is, that's where your answer lies. And so, what is a poltergeist? Well, we know that. And the reason I'm doing this is for Grace, because there are some problems with poltergeists that people have not considered, and why such religions as the Catholic Church perform exorcisms. You see, that when you have a structured water, it leaves the body at the moment of death. There's a 3.2 ounce weight loss, which has now been equated by scientists as a physical representation of the soul. And this water loss, where does it go? Does it go back to the multiverse? Okay, well, where is the multiverse? The multiverse is right in this moment, right here. It's not out there, and it's not over there, and it's not under here. It's right here. It's right in front of us in a dimensional form of understanding. And water is so small, with hydrogen and oxygen, that it's the smallest thing in the universe as we understand things. And so it goes into side phases of water, goes into side phases that we have not yet even begun to understand or describe. And a microtubule is a protein wrap. It's a protein that has water inside it that accounts for your so-called aura, or your how someone reads another person. And sometimes you can smell the anger. You can see it by their actions. There is a radiation field around each of us that has to do with, you poke the right arm, and somehow the left arm is affected by that poking on the right arm. They call that acupuncture. And we don't understand how it works, but we know that there's another circulatory system in the body that has yet been described by modern medicine. And that's what I'm going to say for the moment, is a small microtubule, like a carbon tube, that has such a small space between it that the only thing that can be in it is water. And of course, the smaller you get, circular in the tube, then of course the higher the structuring is of the water. And that at some point you reach such a level of definition that might include the soul of who you were and are and will be in future and past lives. All is contained in that one little drip of water. And if you got 3.5 ounces, wow, that's like a very complex possibilities of reality. And if you have a violent death, there is a high likelihood that some of that water, before it's able to go into the microverse, gets trapped in matter. And if it gets trapped in matter, now you have what we would call an aberrance in the field or an poltergeist. And with all things that are dead wanting to go home, it's trapped in matter. And then there are demons or cooties or maggots, if you will, on a psychic level that feed off this water and exist as a life form, lesser than man. And because each man has deficiencies because of the way we were birthed, so on, we have parts of us that are dead inside. And that's where the maggots will see a live individual and cling on or become demon infested. And we need to always understand that it is our thought that's making all of this happen, because that is the finest form of water there is held in the image of a thought.
Rick, I've never heard it explained.
I figured you had to.
Yeah, I've never heard it explained that way.
I know. It's a model. It's not a reality. It's a model. And so there are several kinds of death. And what exorcisms, plural, are about are releasing that poor soul that's trapped in matter because of the intensity of, let's say, the death that it went through, or the love, or something that caused it to get locked in matter. It's allowed to go back home into a finer set of universes instead of one close to us. Now, if that's a minor form of death, and home is something even further away, imagine what consciousness is and what it is not. And to believe that this is all there is in the universe, this is a dream.
Hold that thought. Dr. Richard Allen Miller is with us, richardallenmiller.com, Richard, A-L-A-N, Miller.com. Rick, you were talking about consciousness?
Well, maybe,
and violent death?
Or not being very conscious. There's a lot of people, including me, that see consciousness, this place that we all are right now listening to the radio and all, is a type of sleep, and has less content of reality than certain dream states that we go through every night. And my guess is that part of dehydration at night is part of the soul going back into matter and becoming the fabric of everything. And that space and time are simple subsets of something much, much, much more profound. And that there's places in dream states that hold more content than our reality. And that's one of the reasons why we dream every night. We need to go back in and reboot to bring us back into the sleep state that we currently am enjoying. And you'll notice that we mostly hang out in the sleep state, consciousness. In other words, we're only asleep 8 hours, maybe, and in that brief moment of 8 hours, just a few hours, probably less than 20 minutes, is held in what we call lucid dreaming, where it's more real than consciousness. I had some friends over last night for dinner, and I pulled out Stephen Kaplan Williams' book on the Jungian Senoi Dream Manual. And when I say that Jungian psychotherapy and the concepts of Carl Jung this is monumental material as a physicist. It is the softer side of sciences that actually have more rigid edges and have had cultures that were exceeded our own in morals and codes of ethics, like the Greek culture, the divine comedy and divine tragedy, and the way they looked at archetypes and the gods that had stories associated with psyche at the well of souls. Now, what does a well look like to you? It's a big hole. And imagine water molecule. You are a water molecule, and you're looking down a large hole to traverse into the underworld of imagination. And that is essentially where the soul resides as a physical analog to the water going down a hole. And there's spin, other kinds of relationships that you have, just like you do with elementary particles. And so I'm going to suggest that there is a whole new construct of physics available to us now that we understand the fact that water, whenever it touches anything, it changes it. And each thing that it touches is different, because it's like a memory. Oh, this is tellurium, this is not plastic. And the way it will then structure. That's why a leading edge on a wave in the ocean is moving faster than the wave itself. Now, it works in chunks like that, and that is the basic foundation today of cold fusion processes as they're being discovered and studied at MIT. Now, we find it everywhere in nature. We just do not see it that way any more than a poltergeist being something that was partially human and is now, or an animal, somehow trapped in physical matter, or rather than going back home to the multiverse, which is also right here at this moment. That means that the fineness of that water molecule is spread into the infinity of that moment or space.
Rick,
it's a way of looking at things so that you have possibilities of how to cleanse the creepiness. Because the problem is, if you have dead spots inside you, you have a sore on your arm and the skin is changing and then there's dead skin. If you don't think bacteria and psychic cooties aren't hanging out there, you have a misconception of what infection is really about. And there are psychic cooties, and they will attach on you and change your soul. And that's why you have to be mindful of knowing your purpose. That's why you're here, is to wake up.
Dr. Rams with us. Rick, as you were talking about this model and the poltergeist, what's coming to my mind was war. War, to me, is murder, mass murder. And I was thinking about my grandfather. He was in the trenches of World War I warfare. He was gassed. They used mustard gas. They used chlorine gas. Of course, they used mortars and rifle projectiles and handgun projectiles. They used every kind of way of killing people if they could. And then my dad was in World War II, and he was part of the cleanup of the Bataan death march, where he saw lots of rotting flesh, and he told me that, Vinny, you'd never ever forget the smell of rotting flesh. So most of my father, my grandfather, as well as uncles, were involved in world wars, mass murder. And we're talking about poltergeist. Now, Rick, with this model, would there be more poltergeist as a result of these violent deaths?
That's what war is. Don't you remember the 1960s? What's it good for? Nothing, absolutely nothing. Yeah. What it does is it creates demons that want to be in the universe you currently inhabit. And they want to take over. And the more war, the closer it gets to you. And you can feel it with road rage. You can feel it with the day-to-day exchange and the way people are changing. And this is why we were God's favored. You have a choice. I remember different people call me because they're hearing voices in their heads. They somehow feel they're being attacked by something. And schizophrenia comes to mind, but the fact that more and more people are experiencing this is a type of global awakening. And it's a metaphor of way of looking at what's going on and what is wrong with our value systems and what needs to be changed in order to change the movie. Now, just because a group of people over here are going to be bigoted religiously, I mean, that's what America was originally based on. And anyone that would come to America and feel that it is not right to have freedom of religion, and that includes Catholics and Muslims, all of them, what's wrong with their input to this country and its purpose? Now, it's time we all man up to the fact that we're all different. In fact, I'm going to go as far as to say that I think there are about as many religions as there are individuals. It's different, slightly different for each of us. And that when we compromise, we actually is a part of being asleep. And that's a good place to start your own introspection of what's important and what values have more meaning for you than others and their values. It doesn't mean they're wrong. That diversity is God's will and is what made man so special. If you had been born in Afghanistan, you would not be a Christian. And you would not believe in Christianity. Now, what's wrong with that picture? Christianity isn't reality. And most religious bigots that would presume that they're absolutely right is a level of insecurity and how deeply asleep they truly are. Intelligence is the awareness of the diversity in nature. And so, we have a responsibility to wake up and allow freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom. And what we need to do now is make distinctions between natural and civil law and why you give up some of your rights so that there's order rather than chaos. Personally, out in the woods where I live, I prefer maritime law, where I am captain and commander of my ship. And I will make mistakes and I will shoal into, the shoreline, sometimes making mistakes, and that's how I learn. And my lessons are quite different than yours. And what we're trying to do is find a way of harmony so that there's a proper burial of the dead parts of self. And we all carry them. Like Dad was an alcoholic, and so I have a penchant. I won't drink, but I take drugs, that kind of thing. These back and forth of how we won't do what our parents do, but we make our own mistakes. This is the area where these cooties and subspaces exist, just like they do in the soil. And it's a metaphor. And once you choose to see it that way, now you understand the necessity of ritual when you bury something, like the Egyptians and the Tibetans, with the Tibetan Book of the Dead. These are protocols of how one handles the emergence of life and death. And your father, your grandfather, I can only imagine what small portions still remain in France, wishing to go back home to self. You carry that in your genes as part of the memory, genetics.
It's absolutely fascinating, and I was thinking, I've got two friends. One of them just died. George Wheelock, I believe you might have met him. He was at several of our expos. He was a U.S. Army major, and he retired, 53 years old, died of cancer. I have another friend down the road, has cancer. Both of them got it in their necks. And I'm wondering how many people are getting cancers as a result of these absolutely horrific, stressful times that they've gone through in the military, where they've been shot at, jumped out of airplanes, injected with who knows what from...
Or have to be forced to do something that they would otherwise not have even considered.
Correct. And I know people who think that, war, killing people during war is not murder. I believe it absolutely positively is murder. I can't think of anything else it could be, when you take the life of someone whom you don't even know. Not only that, it's forced upon you. I mean, I'm not talking about, like Pearl Harbor. I'm not talking about where you're on a ship and everything's fine. All of a sudden, dive bombers come out of the sky and start attacking you. That's defense, from the American side. But on the Japanese side, it was murder. And, I look at it that way. But when you get sent into Afghanistan or Iraq and you're told to just, start bombing, shelling, I think that's murder. And I have a young friend, well, he's not young anymore, but U.S. Navy, and he went to Annapolis, and he studied there, and he was put on a ship, and he was, his responsibility was aiming the big guns on the ship. That was his job. And I said to him, have you ever thought about where that projectile lands on shore? Have you ever thought about that? And what happens? And he became a chaplain instead, literally, because I guess he realized that position included mass murder. Now, I've never talked to him specifically about that, but I do know that he went from aiming the big guns to chaplain.
It's part of the participation mystique. And there's a movie that just came out. It's called Megan Levy. It's about a girl that doesn't know what to do with her life, so she joins the military and becomes a dog trainer and a dog handler. It's an exceptional movie. I recommend it as a good feely thing because it's a true story about a sergeant major, a dog that became a sergeant major, became high-end in terms of what it did. And its last days, when it was too old to fight anymore, and they were going to put it down, and what she chose to do with the dog instead. And it's a metaphor of the way we live and our relationship to things and people around us. I don't know where to go with water except to tell you that I think it is the basis of life. It is the basis of death. It is the basis of consciousness. It is the basis of almost anything I could possibly imagine lies within the structure and memory of water.
Rick, we're in for a treat. I looked at the call screen, and George, USA Preparedness instructor from New Hampshire, is just joining us, and he has brilliant insights on everything he calls about. George, welcome.
I feel humbled by that. Thank you, Vincent. And hello,
well, it's absolutely true.
Well, it kind of takes one to know one because, Dr. Rick, yourself, Dr. Shealy, many others, we're seekers. And we're not satisfied with the lies or the pretense or the ritualistic things that we don't really understand, but we just go through the motions. We want to find out why. And that's really, like Dr. Rick said, that's why we're here. But I've done a lot of work with veterans that was largely in my career and I got to do home reports. I didn't really see too many World War I veterans, although I did have an uncle who was gassed, and yet I hear the music.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing about this, George, in New Hampshire. The gassing was horrific. My grandfather lost most of his voice, and the loudest he could speak was a whisper since World War I for the rest of his life, into his 90s. We'll be right back. Stand by. Doc Brown's with us, Dr. Richard Allen Miller, richardallenmiller.com. George in New Hampshire's with us. And George, we were talking about being gassed in World War I, and one of the things that we take for granted, we take as a right, is the right to be able to breathe. And when you're gassed in a combat situation, that right to breathe has been taken away from you. Please continue.
I'll just say that my great uncle was in World War I, and he was gassed, and he couldn't really hold down a job after World War I because they said for no apparent reason he could just be standing there talking one moment and passed out the next. It was very unpredictable. And years later, when I was in the military, I was at a language school in the Presidio of Monterey, and for the military. And a friend of mine and his wife had come up and lived off post, and there was a nice old Italian gentleman who had been there since maybe the 1920s. He was a fisherman at one time. He was about 88 years old, Mr. Rosario, and he was from Italy. And he had been exposed. I guess my friend's wife baked some cookies and brought it over to him, and he was very touched, so he invited them in, and then I got to meet him. But he told us, he was looking at us one day, and he says, "You young people don't know." He goes, "You don't know." He says in the middle of the night, he says, the mustard gas was still in his body. He says at night he'd break out into a sweat, and he could feel the effects of it over and over again. And he'd break out, and like I say, but and I know, to gas human beings, I mean, we gas insects with insecticides. But they said that gas was so horrific that it was discovered in the 1880s by a British scientist, and they said it was so horrible that it was voted on just to seal it and put it away in the safe, never to be used. And they said when their back was up against it in the middle of World War I and they were losing against the Germans, they were so desperate, they went back into the safe to pull it out. They were going to use anything to win. And they said it was the formula for mustard gas, which the Germans had already been using for at least a year.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's where your demons lie.
Absolutely
That's
horrible.
what creates the demon.
I'll just say this, too, and I don't want to take time away from, I know Dr. Rick has a lot of good and interesting material to cover. I'll just say this, is that a friend of mine had a nurse friend, and she said there was a man who had died on the operating table for 8 minutes. He was clinically dead, and they revived him. But when he was revived, he came back with a very interesting story. And he said somehow, he was floating over his body, and he could see below in the surgical room that the medical staff trying to revive him. And he goes, somehow he floated off through the ceiling, and he ended up somewhere else. And he said that the last memory he had before they revived him was somehow he linked up with these spirits of these dead alcoholics who were desperate to experience again the elixir of alcohol. And they said the last memory he had is they were all hoovering, these individuals, disembodied spirits himself, were hoovering over a bar, and they were trying to cast themselves into the patrons of the bar to experience the alcohol again. And and I know, how many people have you seen at a party or you heard stories at work afterwards where the person wakes up the next morning with no memory of what he did, what happened, and everybody's telling them how the crazy antics that had happened, and it was almost like the person wasn't himself, and he wasn't.
He was possessed. Just like in the movies.
Yeah. I think that's the word demon, demon. In other words, something might, when they died, depending on how they lived, they may have sunk to a level where, in other words, they're desperate to like this, the old joke, The Exorcist. The exorcised person didn't pay his bill, so he got repossessed. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist that one. Hey,
George,
I'll let you gentlemen go, but very interesting. I'm sorry, I just had a chicken on this, all right? Take care.
George, thank you so much for calling in. Dr. Richard Allen Miller and I will be right back after these few short commercial announcements. I'd love to talk about the Lily Wave when we come back. Doc Ram, RichardAllenMiller.com, Richard, A-L-A-N, Miller.com. Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Hour number 2 of USAPrepares.com. Doc Ram's with us, Dr. Richard Allen Miller. Rick, Lily Wave, can you tell us what it is?
Yeah, it's a concept that takes off from my binaural beat concepts in Power Tools. Power Tools has the 8 protocols I used to train Navy SEALs in essentially becoming Supermen. And one chapter is on biofeedback and the binaural beat of frequencies, where one ear hears, let's say, 40 hertz, and the other ear might hear 49 hertz, which would then, because of going back and forth from one ear to the other, going across the brain, would drive the brain into a 9 hertz middle theta state. And it immediately relaxes you. You drop down into a trance state. Your brain starts to go in 9 hertz related to theta, or deep sleep. Now, if you were to balance those frequencies with 9 hertz, what happens next is a type of brain entrainment occurs that can also set up standing waves on the heart and in the brain itself. And with biological amplification in the brain, where you take a certain beat frequency on this organ or this part of the brain, it gets amplified to other parts of the brain. Now you have a thing like where you hum over water and you get a sacred geometry to occur. What happens next is you have standing waves across the brain. And at different frequency bands, they do different things, including a type of mind control where you can overlay types of other frequencies like audio, and you can hear voices in your head. This was originally called synthetic telepathy. The direction of it was such that they could take someone that was very paranoid in what's called a P300 wave, very complex wave that goes through the brain as a vibratory frequency thing, like a wave in the ocean going across the brain, that would cause the brain to go into a certain rhythmic state that then can be reprogrammed. And that's what we used it for, meditation. You'd go down into these states and then be able to learn a language quicker. You could reprogram behavior patterns or habits, and other kinds of things. Now, we are constantly being assaulted by advertising on television, standing waves, with a flicker rate of the TV that will cause epileptics to go into seizure, will cause you to get sleepy and doze off into a altered state where, you want to go buy Colonel Sanders chicken or something. And this new wave form is called a balanced bidirectional phase or pulse pair, where you have a beat that goes across the brain at 9 hertz. And that is quite dangerous and is now a weapon of choice used by police and military. It's called a balanced bidirectional pulse pair that was originally developed by John Lilly at Berkeley. Is a carrier waveform that bypasses the mind's subconscious defense mechanisms that you have. It has, you can monitor it via an oscilloscope, connect to homes like where you have an AC ground outside, and you can measure the house, and you can see that it has these kinds of beat frequencies going through the house. That's why you feel comfortable in these rooms and not those. It's ever present, and now they're learning how to use this. Of course, not in medicine, but as a weapon. That's the way it works. You know, you start with weapons first, and then we look at the other side of the sword and the possibilities of how it might be used as health. And it's usually transmitted in the ultrasonic region from 1 to 10 megahertz, and the electromagnetic wavelengths vary. Jeff Rentz has talked to me about this, and so there's some recordings on Rentz's TV or radio that I've done on that, others of that nature. There's not a lot of... you can use an AC socket to transmit these waves into the room. And so your home is essentially not a Faraday cage, but a mind control box that, when properly manipulated, can cause you discomfort and or reprogramming without your awareness. Now, the thing is, you can't make anybody do anything they don't want to do. In that sense of it, you have an inner voice inside your head, and you may not be knowing where that inner voice came from. Is it you, or is it something else outside trying to convince you that it's you? Well, that's something you're never going to know at this level of awakeness, because you're basically asleep and you don't have a clue. Most people don't know how to listen to themselves with the gut, the instinct of knowing what is you and what is not you. It will always, the correct answer is the first thing that comes into your head. That is always, if you immediately suspect this is not me, you're probably absolutely correct. And I have said that to people. I don't know what's happening, but this is not me. My behavior. Something's wrong here, and it's absolutely correct. And what will happen is it's a cell tower, it is a smart meter, it is who knows. And with the level of play that we now are using with electromagnetic fields in our everyday life, from the computers and the Wi-Fi and the rest of it, we're in an extremely toxic universe. And if you do not think that that is not affecting your soul on a micro level with the water inside your body, you need to understand that basically the water in your body is like acting as a large antenna, transmitting and receiving information. And that this water inside your body is being affected by all these different frequencies. And the Lilly wave was where it first started. Actually, it's Alan Frey that did the deed. They call it the Lilly wave. It is not John Lilly, and it is not Robert Monroe and binaural beat and those things that the Monroe Institute. It actually started with Alan Frey at Willow Grove. And I was there to help do some of the original studies in that area. And basically, what they 0.3 to 3 gigahertz, very narrow bandwidth from 1 to 10, 0.3 to 3 gigahertz, that bandwidth of microwave will cause the temporal lobes in your brain, the frontal lobes, the temporals on the side, that cause them to heat up, and they expand slightly and begin to ring like a bell. And you can put all kinds of information. Heterodyne is what they call that, where you put that's the carrier frequency, the 0.3 to 3 gigahertz, and then you can put audio on that, and you will literally, from resonance, hear the voice inside your head, and it did not go through the ear system. And that form of synthetic telepathy is why people are more and more starting to feel like they're being targeted individuals. They're hearing voices. And it's not done with intent. Yes, it is. But sideways for a moment, it's just in everyday life, all around you. And some of it is unintentional, and yet it's assaulting you. It's kind of like putting a dye in the ocean, and at some point, it gets on your skin. And now you've got a dye from the ocean. And is it the ocean doing it? No, but it's the dye in the ocean, the electromagnetic environment that we live in. That's one of the reasons why any self-respecting alien that come down here to slum in force space would have some kind of, a protective device wearing a suit so he's not affected by this creepy, polluted environment that we call Earth. And, it's a way of looking at things. And when you realize that superposed on that are all these weird, creepy things, in the old days when Solomon the king was king and ruled, he wrote the greater and lesser keys of Solomon. And the lesser keys were about the Lemegeton, the fallen angels. And I taught a course at demonology at Georgetown, a graduate level course. I was a lot younger kid, and they brought me back in, and I got all these Jesuits taking notes, and I identified 68 of the 72 fallen angels as qualities in men that were deemed unworthy, like jealousy, rage, anger. These come out of Babylonian star maps. The star constellations were reflected waves. It was a way of looking at reality, which is different than our current epoch that looks at things. But a demon is like your shadow. That's why they call the projection of the shadow is how you see evil in another person, is because it's in you. It is deemed unworthy. And so even though it's a quality of man, it's a lesser quality of man deemed unworthy. And so it's not. And that's where the concept of ethics and morals come in, where you have a relationship where each of us is different. And what I'm trying to do now is sort that out for myself so that I can leave a footprint for children to understand what I had to go through to get to this point of net or new, or realization of self, and what I am and what I am not.
Rick, as you were describing the mind, the consciousness, the soul, I was thinking about something that I've been working on for several months. And here's what it is. I've been building a solar array, a rack, if you will, a solar ground mount, to mount solar panels, roughly 1 meter by 3 meter. 1 meter by 2 meters in size, a bunch of these things on the ground. And I want to have the right angle. I want to make sure that since we live in the tornado belt, that it won't blow over, that it's strong, it's durable, it'll last, 40 years. And I wanted to do it very inexpensively. I wanted to use used materials, and I wanted to weld them together. And so I've come up with a design, and then another design, and probably before actually cutting the metal and buying the metal, I've come up with about 20 different iterations of designs, each one a little bit better, each one driving my family crazy, because I keep saying, yeah, but I want to change it. And then they'll say, I'll tell you what, I think it's a good design, but I want to sleep on it. And then I'd sleep on it and wake up the next day, and I'd have a different, better design, 1.21 version instead of 1.20. And then the next day I'd have 1.22, and then 1.23, and then maybe even 2.0. And what I'm saying is it would change based on me sleeping on it and thinking while I'm sleeping. Now, my question to you, Rick, is I seem to be able to do some of my best thinking on things like this when I'm asleep. Does it have something to do with my soul, the rest, some kind of interaction with the soul in my mind being able to think? What is it? Do you know?
Well, no, but I suspect that you're dead on. and that you are able to think better when you're asleep than you can when you're awake. How's that work? You're more yourself. Now, there is a balance. There is a way to defend yourself. For example, for me, the way I always did it was white noise. Pink noise is what I call it, the ocean waves. Mm-hmm. Yep. When you random, it's washing out the intent and making it more random, like having a waterfall at the entrance of your house where you hear falling water. Now, if that creates willard water in the air, so you're breathing it like a waterfall does, you always feel refreshed and clearer when you're near water. Why is that? Well, you're less assaulted. And this is a natural defense against mind control, is white noise. And you can generate a white noise generator, or you can go like I do to the beaches to chill out. And just being on the beaches for an hour or two, listening to the waves and the softness of the rolling of waves. Have you ever noticed how refreshed you are afterwards?
Absolutely.
It's because you're under assault. Even when you're
another thing that I was interested in knowing why is it that most of mankind chooses to live at the boundary of land and water, meaning the oceanfront.
Remember when I said water, when it touches anything, it changes it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or
there's
second best.
Key. That's the key to the kingdom. And why water is essential in everything, including hydration.
So the first choice, I think, for mankind is to live near the ocean, and most people do. They live near the coast. Second choice would be to live near a really, really large body of water, like a huge lake. Third might be, I'm talking about Lake Superior, Lake Huron, Lake Erie. Next would be a large river. Then next would be, a small river, and then a stream, and then last would be a pond, and then after would be.
There you are. You're starting to get the importance of why water is essential in your life, just in all phases of water. It's and of course, moving water is the key, because if it's moving, it's constantly rechanging the relationship itself to what it's touching.
I'm fascinated by what you said about the white noise, and I'm thinking about how many of these large skyscraper-type buildings that have lobbies, that have these man-made waterfalls inside them or fountains inside them, that show the movement of water and generate white noise simultaneously. We'll be right back. Doc Graham's with us. RichardAllenMiller.com. Richard, A-L-A-N, Miller.com. Rick, do you have any specials that you want to talk about?
I'm about to release my metaphysics books. By the way, thank you. I see you're trying to integrate Joey. I wish Grace would be okay with her haunted house. I'm telling her that she needs to advertise it in the Berkeley Barb and raise the price $20,000 just to let some creepy drag queen want to live in an hysterical place in Ryan, Oklahoma.
Well, maybe she could find someone who wants to set it up as a destination for tours.
Because I can tell you the place is haunted. It really is. And we don't know what caused it, except that there was a fire where the house burnt down at one time. And so I'm guessing there was some kind of a tragedy that locked soul in the matter. And it's there. And there is no question. You can take pictures and then blow it up with, Photoshop or something. And there's something looking out at you. And, it's kind of creepy. And,
Rick, is this measurable? Is this measurable? I mean, is there some kind of
what would you measure it with?
What? That's what I'm asking. So let me give you an example.
I don't know how to measure poltergeist. I would like to be like Ghostbusters, where I had a big laboratory on my back and I carried a weapon in, lock and load, and we'll go in and shoot them, with etheric energy or whatever they call that thing, like Ghostbusters. For me, I don't have a sense yet of what we're dealing with other than structured water locked into matter. And how you would release that? Possibly a lily wave. Yeah, that's probably how you would approach something like that, where you're using a binaural parabeat to drive this way and that way out of the material to the point where the water is released and allowed to go back home, which is into a finer thread of universes within itself. Like dendrites in a brain, they're now discovering that certain kinds of intelligence may have a secondary set of dendrites on a finer level that allow me more precision in going into memory. Memory is actually time travel. That's going back in the past, because what you're essentially doing is reconstructing the brain at the moment of that knowledge base. And it's all like a hologram. And you're recreating that moment when you registered the thing. And I find it very interesting that we have two brains like a cavitation process. Just like the star system, we have a binary, and just like the galaxy with a white and black hole. I find that metaphor interesting, and I don't know yet where it's going to lead me.
Bob Dylan wrote a song. It's called Desolation Row. And part of the lyric of Desolation Row says they bring them to the factory where the heart attack machine is strapped across their shoulders, and then the kerosene. And I'm thinking about this lily wave that you talked about, and I'm thinking about what Bob Dylan said decades and decades ago, this heart attack machine. And isn't that what you're talking about, that this machine, this electromagnetic machine, this wave-generating machine can cause people to have heart attacks?
Infrasound was a weapon that was developed by the French, where they low frequency, high amplitude, requires a lot of power, could set up a standing wave on the heart and cause ventricular fibrillation. It could kill people in the field with heart attacks using sound.
That's what I'm talking about.
Exactly. Infrasound is what that's called, infrasound. And it was a weapon developed by France, 45, 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It
That's about
requires a lot of energy, because low frequencies, not high frequencies like gigahertz, low frequencies, 4 hertz, to drive that through matter requires a lot of energy. And to permeate, it gets absorbed very quickly, just like low frequency noises do. And that's why you have these boom boxes that are boom, 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 boom. They require a tremendous amount to push that air up to the point where you can hear it, 4 feet or 5 feet away. And so to set up a field weapon, to set up a standing wave across the field and kill everybody in the field with a heart attack, was a weapon that the French developed during World War II. And it didn't work because we didn't have a big enough generator to do that. But now with the discovery of how to split the atom, that is now possible again. And you can, that like an ELF pulse weapon, where it fries everything. That frequency band is different than infrasound, which would set up a standing wave on the heart. There is a scientist, Dr. Beale, out of Florida, that did some monumental studies on LD50 ratios of different frequency bands to biological processes. And that's where mind control started. Beale's work is monumental because different parts of the body absorb certain frequency bands, and at some point will be destroyed because of them. That means there's a 50% LD50 ratio. 50% of the people exposed will die, that kind of thing. Its biological processes are electromagnetic in nature, and there is, surrounding all of it, on the surface of the skin, are microtubules with structured water. And my guess is that's your radiating thing that people call the aura. Basically, we have different points on our body that radiate things. Now, there's a group of chemistries called oils, fats, and waxes. And in Hindu mythology, going back into the Upanishads, they talked about those as nadi, N-A-D-I, points on the body. Your ear has a certain kind of wax that it releases, and the side of your nose, and on your armpits, and in your crotch, and between your toes. These are different oils that are secreted. And under certain conditions, a psychic can somehow sense anger or because there's this redness around the person. It's all related to body language and emission of pheromone and other kinds of chemistries that are being related on the body. And the body is like a giant antenna that is radiating and absorbing chemistry exchange between that and the environment. And nonverbal communication is a typical thing. Body language. You can read somebody by the way they're moving. Neurolinguistic programming and so on. So there's a lot of different softer sciences that we don't yet know quite how to go in and measure them. Carillion photography was one of the original things that I first went in and entered the season showing what it was not. Simon Carillion had developed that out of Prague and basically thought that they were ionizing radiation around the body, and it would ionize these gases, and there would be glow points that would be different colors that they thought might contain information. As it turns out, it was secondary emission of electrons, which means it's impossible to read that. But what came out of that construct was the MRI and the functional these devices where they would set up you in an ionizing or magnetic field, nuclear magnetic resonance, and then look around the body at the kinds of light that are being emitted around your ears and so on to be determined. I know that Buddhists used to make a lot of importance on these radiation points on the body because, for example, in Kathmandu, I used to go up there for the hashish called charas, or temple ball. And the temple ball was made where a Buddhist went out into the marijuana fields in a meditational thing, and they would use the oil on the side of their nose as part of the oil process of making what was called charas, or temple ball, to be distinguished from scimitar or the hashish that came out of Turkey using animal fat. They're all oils, fats, and waxes, but each one's slightly different and has information about what's going on internally in the body. And at some point, I think we will have a rapid scan medical diagnostic device. That is a chapter that I have written in a book called Fluke Central, that at some point will be in posthumously, probably after I'm worm food. But these are books that I have written on studies that I've done that lead us in a direction toward understanding what the physical body is and what it is not.
Rick, you're talking about these standing waves, and I mentioned Bob Dylan and the heart attack machine.
I love Bob Dylan, by the way.
And as you were,
FYI.
I thought he was just one of the most brilliant people on the planet.
Never
when he was
smiled.
writing. There's no...
I saw him smile once. You do not want to see Bob Dylan smile. Trust me.
Here's something that I wanted to ask you. I remember back, I think it was the late 1960s that this happened. During the 60s, we had the Beatles, and there was harmony, and there were lyrics, and the song sounded great.
Comes to mind. Okay. Yeah, it didn't cost anything.
Yeah, it was the Beach Boys, and it was love, and it was just a great time. Well, I think in the 1970s this began, and music changed. I believe this was when it happened. I may be slightly off, but I don't think so. Then I started hearing parents say things like, turn that thing down. Turn that thing down. And what I'm saying is, there was something with the frequencies of the music that irritated the physical bodies of the parents. The parents were older than the children who were listening to this music. And there was some physical irritation. Maybe it was this wavelength, this frequency that you're talking about, that made the parents' hearts beat irregularly. Is that possible? Is that possible?
Yeah, that's Velvet Underground. All of it, yeah.
Class, I'd like to share a very quick tip with you. This is a Mike Ma, USA Preparedness Instructor type strategy. There's a woman in Queens, New York, a 50-year-old woman, and she was robbed by a gang of thugs. And it looked like they wanted to have their way with her. And so she let them know in no uncertain terms that she was HIV positive. And they decided that just robbing her was enough. And they did not sexually assault her. So just a thought that if you're in a situation, you may want to claim that you have some disease that would not be very pleasant for those attacking you. And that's a Mike Ma strategy, M-A-H, Mike Ma, USA Preparedness Instructor. He's used it and he's talked about it on the air. That was one thing. Rick, atomized dust. You know, there's this thought now that we are breathing these particles and these and atoms and compounds in the air that are causing us to be overweight. Things like bisphenol A, things like microfibers in our sofas, fabrics in our rugs, and on and on and on. Your thoughts on any of that? Another kind of pollution.
Yeah, I don't have enough data to actually have an opinion yet in that regard. But have you noticed, at least here on the West Coast, we have not had geoengineering in over a week and a half, almost 10 days now, without a single creepy cloud in the sky. Now, there's two possibilities there. They're laying it down at night like they do in Mexico, so we won't notice, and or Trump has finally drawn some lines, and they're starting to abate. I don't know. I can tell you...
Rick?
Yes.
I've seen it. I've seen what you're talking about. I've been telling Mrs. Finelli and the family it is delightful. It's hot. We are actually able to generate solar electricity to run the farm because the previous regime, the dark regime of Barry Soetoro, Hillary Clinton, and that ilk, we do not have the chemtrails of that ilk. We do not. And they stopped, not exactly when he took over stewardship of the United States Corporation, but months after. And now the skies are clear. The grass is growing better. The trees look better. Everything looks better. However, we have more algae on the ponds than we've had before because it is so hot.
Yeah, there's something going on, and the bottom line is, I wish they'd give us disclosure. Mm-hmm. I wish.
What about What about the Vostok ice cores? 420,000 years of history in these ice cores. What are your thoughts about that?
Wasn't that a good video? It really laid it down. That's Halpern and others. That video shows that this whole concept of global warming that we're experiencing is not about man. And this agenda of the United Nations to cut back emissions, to do this, to do that, is not actually a correct assessment of the data at hand, and that video that you're referring to, you should post that for people to reference from this interview. That video is very clear, showing it is a natural cycle of the Earth in terms of its orbit in space, its orbit around our sun, and our sun's orbit in deep space. It is a cycle. And for anybody to think that we're the ones doing it is presumptuous. Something is affecting our sun right this moment. And the radiation coming off the sun is different right now than it ever has been. And while ants flourish here and don't flourish there, there's something happening to our sun right now that I don't understand yet.
Yeah, and there's no question about it. Small animals seem to be disappearing. We used to have lots more insects that we don't have. We used to have lots more flies, lots more ants. There used to be more bug chatter at night than we have now. There used to be birds on the power lines, squirrels everywhere. Class, look around. Are they in your neighborhood? I have a feeling that they're in decline, just as they are in our neighborhood, our neck of the woods right here in Missouri. Same with you, Rick?
I've noticed the mosquitoes are less out where we are here this year than previous, and yet we've had a wet climate, so I don't understand what's going on. I know that the sun appears whiter.
Yep, we're out of time. Rick, thanks so much for being with us.